We've had several questions relating to this topic, but here are two of them. One asks, which is the correct way to approach clothes visually and technically, the way the old masters, that is the Flemish and Italian painters of the 15th century, did. You see all the delicate folds, all that playing with values that make the cloth look most alive. I'd like to understand those techniques. That's one of them. And then the other one says, again, asking for painting on various fabrics, but like a wool sweater or a silk shirt or long johns, surface quality of fabrics. How do you do this? It's funny how many times the same answer can work for a number of kinds of images. Sometimes the best way to see something is to take it totally out of context, like we have here. If you didn't know, had two photos of fabric here, you might look at that and think it might be a number of kinds of things. The universe is made up that way. But if we zoom in close, then we'll begin to see more of what it's made of, how to look at it. And then if I tell you this is a close-up of silk, and this is a close-up of wool, you begin to put it in context. Now let's take that just a little bit further. I'm going to take this image away. Now if we look at these two, this is a Sargent piece. Sargent, you know, is a early 20th century painter. And then this one goes all the way back to the 15th century, a Titian painting. Well, if you look at the fabric, you can't see it really well, but look really closely here. Can you really tell what kind of fabric that is? It may be cotton. I don't much think it's silk, but if you look here at this fabric, you feel that it might be a very expensive, maybe silk. What is it that gives it that quality? And if we put this one beside those, again, you begin to see that this feels more like this. This feels more like that. So what is the actual difference between those two? Well, let's take a little bit closer look at this, at the Sargent piece. And so I'm going to zoom in just a bit. I have zoomed in just a bit at just the fabric itself. So we get a little bit closer to it. Now we begin to see a little bit of what it's made of. That it's made of values. Well, of course. And it's the values, the way we handle the values, more so even than the color. Although the color in Sargent's piece does play a large role, whereas the color in Titian's piece is more of a describer. The red is functioning more to describe the red, the color, than it is to communicate light and shadow there. In Sargent's time, he has become aware of how light affects color and how we can use vibrations of color to communicate how light falls on things. So we begin to become aware of warm and cool, but it's still the value that makes the difference. So if we zoom in a little bit closer here, that we become more aware of the value difference. And let's get even just a little bit closer to right there, and we begin to get some real keys of what he's done. That's one way to really examine the techniques, the technical side of how you paint anything, but looking at how other artists did it, which is what this first question was about, is key. Now, what techniques do you use? Let's just break this down just a little bit. What techniques do you need to know how to do? And then how do you use them? One technique that you need to know how to do is how to blend colors, and how to gradate values. So let's just look at that for a moment. Now, some of you might think, oh, well, I already know how to do that. Well, you just hang on, because there might be some people watching who don't quite get that yet. How do you gradate values? So here I'm just creating a neutral made of ultramarine blue and a Rembrandt transparent oxide red. And we've got the darkest value. We don't see this value. We may see just a little bit here, but in the part that communicates fabric, we don't see this dark value. We see a value here that is in the shadow. It's created by shadow. And we see values here, they're created not in shadow. But we see blending, we see gradations within those value areas. So let's pull some white over. Give myself a good little batch of white. Pull it over about right here. Now, you create a gradation. If you want a really, really smooth gradation, you create a gradation by beginning with the darkest. This is, I found to be easier when creating a gradation. Begin with the darkest value you see. Now, so I'm going to aim for this value right here, which is about right in there, the darkest value that I see. And let's just see. Check it in your brush. Compare the value of the paint in your brush with the value of whatever you're going for. And I'm just going to, now this is not for fabric. This is technique. This is method. Holding the brush, not straight out like this, but holding the brush at a relatively almost a 45-degree angle so the paint goes on smoothly. There is that single value. Now, if I want to gradate that, meaning I want to get that value a little lighter, then what I do is add a little bit of light to my brush. Mix it in the brush relatively. It doesn't have to be thoroughly mixed, but relatively well. And when you're gradating, it's better to add just enough of the lighter color into the brush to take it just one value up. So that's not quite enough, kind of overdid that. Let's do it again. Here we go. A little bit more. There we go. One value up like this, and then put it beside, and then kind of pull the brush between them. I got a very subtle change in value there. Now I'm going to pull just a little bit more, and once again add just enough of the darker color into it. Let's see if we get, it's not quite the change I'm looking for. I'm going a little too slow. There we go. Alright, so that is very slightly lighter. That gradates very slightly lighter. And then I can just pull the brush very gently between those two. Crisscross, or usually crisscross keeps it from creating a direction. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Now you see you have a very gentle gradation. And if you look right in here, you will see that kind of gradation. Very gentle from dark to light. And this is the kind of gradation that you see within the shadow areas of fabric. Now, where it gets lighter, it goes lighter to darker. If it goes lighter to darker, then we go backwards. We take that same value here and gradually add a little bit of dark to it. And, okay, a little bit more. Okay, here we go, right here. Here we go. Now it's getting darker to lighter. And sometimes we need to pull that paint out of the brush like this, and then give it a very gentle, so let's sit the brush right in between those two and give it a very gentle brushing between the two until you get them thoroughly blended. Very gentle with the brush tilted at least a 45-degree angle. Very gentle, and until you see those two merge into each other right like that. And that's what you see going on about right here, or in this area right here. That is the technique of gradating. You can do that in any value range. It's a good idea for the practice part of building the technique to go from and keep within a very narrow value range, going dark to light and back to dark, dark to light and back to dark. And you can now, if you describe that to yourself, what do we see here? And we see two things. We see the gradation, but we see the gradation moving in a direction. And those two things together help create that feeling in the fabric. So here we have it moving in this direction. We have the gradation moving in this direction, but the fold's moving in that direction. So that's kind of this turned upside down. Here we have it moving in this direction. So you create the direction by the way you move the brush. So we get these variations. Now let's look at one other thing that goes on in the fabric itself. We have a little bit of a value contrast. It's not exactly a gradation. Dark to light. We have it's actually lighter here, a little darker, and then lighter here. Now how do we make that happen? We change the value in the brush. Once again, so I can just barely go a little bit darker. Be sure I'm going to be in the right area here. And so now if I want this to change directions, I do something like that. And so now I've got that moving in a different direction, a little bit darker. If I need that edge a little bit as if it were like right here, I need that edge a little bit more blended. And so I just wipe the paint off the brush. Just get the paint wiped off the brush and pull the brush very gently, the corner of the brush just the tips of the brush, very gently against that edge, moving it in the same direction, and we get that blend. So you see, it's the value difference that makes the fold feel like fold, make the fabric feel like fabric. Now, in the light part, there is where you find the texture. If you're waiting for me to get to that, the thing that I want you to notice, go back to that original photograph we had. For the shinier fabrics, we have a stronger value contrast. We have stronger light reflecting on the turns of the folds. For the softer fabrics like wool, cotton, and those, we don't get that. The shinier fabrics like silk reflect light. When they reflect light, we're going to have a stronger light on the surface. The softer fabrics, like softer surface fabrics like wool and cotton, and those don't have that reflective quality, so we don't have it quite so light. And so the technique of that, if I just went right over it, well, right in here, this part that communicates the texture of the fabric happens in the light area, and more so than it does in the shadow area. So the shadow area, pretty much, if you look at, well, don't see it really clearly here, but if you look at the shadow areas in here, they pretty much look the same. Shadow areas in here, maybe a little bit more of a value difference, but where the light's reflecting, the areas where the light is reflecting are the areas that are going to reveal the surface quality. So what goes on there, I'm just going to stick with the value here now without getting into the color that Sargent got into, because it's the value that makes the difference. So for the softer fabrics, I'm going just to pull white, and we're going to we have value contrast in the areas where the light's hitting. So we can go to, what is the darkest we find in here? Maybe about like this, about values, well, on the traditional value scale, it would be about a 3 to 4. If you're using the more modern scale, it's just reverse, 7 to 8. So I don't relate to that one. Okay, we see here, get that just a little bit darker. Right here would be where it begins to come out of shadow and where the light begins to hit, like that. Sort of like here. I'm just going to keep that related. All edges are soft in fabric. All edges are softened. You're probably, where the fabric is folding and stuff like that, you're probably not going to see any real hard edges, although it might feel a little bit harder where really a light area meets a shadow area. But keeping those edges as soft as possible is one of those keys there. Now I want you to watch, keeping here as we're moving, this is what we would call a low halftone. It's a little light's beginning to hit it. Now I'm going to have something at the bottom that's a little darker, like right in here too, so that you can see the difference. And right up against that, and I'm sort of randomly creating the direction here. Right in here is where we're going to show the feeling of the texture. So I'm going to add just a little bit more of that dark into the light. Now, it's a matter of controlling value. If you watch a previous quick tip, was it 332? I'm talking about the values. In this case, I was talking about values atmosphere. Value contrast has to be close. Close value relationship. That's usually where people lose control of value, is keeping the value relationship close where it really needs to be close. So let's just keep that value relationship as this would. Let's get that a little bit lighter. Get a little bit more under control right in here. We're just going to kind of build that a little bit lighter, as if we might have a fold right in here, and we begin to feel more of the texture, seeing a little value contrast and having the little bit of difference beside it. We begin to feel more of the texture quality of wool and cotton, the softer fabrics, wool and cotton. Now, you will notice as I begin to get the lighter reflections in there, or add the lighter quality to that, let's go right in here for maybe the lightest thing we have, and as I say, take the stroke right here and just sort of pull that. Now you see it begins to feel a little bit more like the texture of silk because of the strong value contrast. And get those edges, work out those edges and have them a little bit softer here. Because of the stronger value contrast of the reflection, how the silky feeling, silkness, reflects the light. So get these edges again. All the edges need to be softened. Get those edges again. And we begin to see now the difference between the feeling of silk against what would be the feeling of cotton. Keep those edges soft. And so there you have it. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianneMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.